You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we talk about something that's super important, but often overlooked: hiding your backup disk. Look, you guys know me. I'm absolutely pro tape, but the reality is most people are using disk-based backup for most everything. And here's the problem. If you're storing your backups right in d:/backups or some other obvious directory, you're basically putting out a welcome mat for threat actors. When they get into your system and they're trying hard to do exactly that, the first thing they look for is your backup system. Delete that and they can do whatever they want. So today, Prasanna and I will walk through several ways to keep your backup disks hidden and more secure. Your backups are your last line of defense, so let's make sure that they're not sitting out in the open like a bike with no lock. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the production database that we had just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this podcast. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy who was actually a little helpful today, Prasanna Malayandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm a little worried. What was I helpful about?
You actually helped me feel a little better. I was having a rough morning.
I'm glad I can help.
You were actually helpful, as opposed to your usual difficult self.
Hey, now, I don't think I'm difficult ever.
No, I'm clearly the difficult one. You know how in every relationship there's like the mean one and the nice one? You're clearly the nice one.
So it's like good cop, get bad cop.
Yeah, you're definitely the good cop for sure. And everybody is like, just like when I go places with my wife, they're like, how did you end up with that guy?
They're like, can you bring your wife all the time, like to your favorite breakfast place, right?
Yeah, whenever I go there, I'm there way more often than she is because she spends so much time with her mom. But every time we go, they're like, we love when you're here, right? They love to hear like her giving me a hard time, and
busting your chops.
Exactly. But yeah, I was having a rough morning, and you helped me out a little bit. Didn't solve my problems, but you just listened to me, which sometimes
it's okay. 90% of the time, people just need someone to vent to,
Yeah. We're going to get right into it today.
What are we talking about?
Well, so...
Actually, you know what? Before we get there.
What's that?
You keep forgetting something.
What? To tell people to subscribe and to...
Yeah.
And to tell them about our amazing YouTube channel.
Yes, I think you should be telling people, because how many people are aware? They're probably using a podcast app on their phone, right, or their device, and they're probably downloading, and they don't realize that they can see our beautiful mugs, right, live, and see these expressions.
Our mugs. They can see our mugs. Some, I don't know if you've ever been told, but some people tell me I have a face for radio. Yeah, so you can see us on YouTube, and sometimes there are things that we do where we actually show images that we can only do on YouTube. So, you can check it. It's the same name, the Backup Wrap-Up, on YouTube, and you can subscribe there as well. We're starting to get quite a good following on YouTube, so that's good. And sometimes some of the episodes, not most of the episodes, but some of the episodes actually end up with more views on YouTube than they do on the podcast app. So. What I'd like to hear from is anyone who's listening to us on YouTube podcasts. That's a new thing.
Wait, there's a YouTube podcast?
Yeah, so they did away with what did they do away with? The Google podcast app. Right? There was a Google podcast platform because YouTube is owned by Google. And so now you had to submit your RSS feed to YouTube. And so on my YouTube channel, I see it. You don't see it as a regular YouTube viewer. But on my channel, every podcast episode is actually on there twice. There's the YouTube version,
the video, and then there's a podcast version.
Yeah. I don't know. You know what? I probably could look on there and see if there's like 2 people listening via pod. I don't know why they felt the need to do that, but they did it. I don't know. And why, with all the technology that they have available, why they can't just take my video and then have an audio feed from it. Clearly, that could be done, right? But I digress. Anyway.
What are we talking about? So now that we've dealt with all the in all of that rambling, Curtis really meant to say, watch us on YouTube if you want to see our faces.
Yeah.
And please subscribe to the podcast using your favorite podcast application so you never miss an episode.
There you go. All those things. So today, I want to talk about... So first off, I'll back up and say, I'm pro tape, right? I'm pro tape in many, many ways, right?
You're probably the most pro tape person I know. Other than Rich.
Yeah, other than Rich, yeah. But having said that, tape has become much less popular in what I'm going to call operational backup and recovery over the years, right?
Yeah, and
what has exploded in popularity is the use of disk-based backups.
Yeah.
And one of the most popular backup apps, in the world, right? Veeam, for example, runs in Windows, and the default installation of Veeam and other products like it is to have a directory. Like if you just like following the little prompts and then, you create, you're like, oh, here is a file system. Here is a disk array. Here is a file server. And I'm going to put my backups on there,
Yep.
/backups.
Yep.
Right.
And it doesn't care if it's direct attached or if it's network or whatever, right?
Right. And they do that because they want it to be simplistic. And I also, I'm going to 100% say I haven't installed Veeam in a while. And so I don't know what additional, I know that they have done a lot of things in the last few years to, because the default, they want it to be simple, right?
Yep.
The Veeam's thing is it just works, right?
Yep.
The downside of just working is if it's too simple, you find yourself installing backups in a directory that is of the same operating system and the same level of access and everything as everything else. And what it is the one really bad thing about disk, if it's accessible to a user, is that it's super easy to delete all the backups, right?
Well, and user could be a person logged into that system who accidentally says, hey, this drive looks full, let me delete it, right? Or it could be a malicious user who gains access to that device and now is able to blow it away.
Exactly. And I would assume that the normal configuration, it would at least need to be a privileged user, but still a privileged user could be
a malicious user.
A bad person or a dumb person.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back to what you had, one of the first statements you made, right? Which was like, tape is great, but people are moving away from tape.
Yeah.
Right? And I think one of the reasons that, like, especially for these types of use cases, it's not so much the physical tape device, that it's not so much the actual tape that I think becomes expensive. It's all the infrastructure, right? You need to buy a tape drive, right? How much were the tape drives you bought recently? Like last year?
Yeah, they were very expensive.
Right? Right? And just imagine, like, that's just the cost to get started, right? And then after that, you're buying tapes. And so if you don't have a lot of devices or systems you need to back up, tape doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Which is where disk drives, right, kind of make more sense from a cost per terabyte.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why disk became really popular. And I want people's backups to just work, right? I want them to function, and tape was very problematic. As big of a fan as I am, tape was very problematic when we start talking about day-to-day incremental backups. Disk is so much better than that. Having said all of that, the one area that it really stinks at is it's really easy to get rid of a whole bunch of data, right? And so what the title of this episode is Hide Your Disk Backups. And so what I want to say is, and we'll talk about a couple of different ways to do that, is I do not want for a threat actor to gain administrative access to your backup system and then go, look, d:/backups format. Right?
Yep.
Very, very bad. Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, there's also accidents that can happen and things like that. But I'm primarily worried about a threat actor that the first thing, and by the way, I had a great meeting. Shout out to the cybersecurity meetup group in San Diego. Had a meeting with them the first time. I've lived here for all these years and never knew that this was going on. So down in San Diego, I live in North County and down in San Diego. Went and met with these people, and it's funny when I'm in a cybersecurity group and they're like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, that's complicated." But we started talking about backups, and I was talking about this topic of the idea that, you know, that threat actors are after your backup system. And multiple people I talked to confirmed, they're like, oh yeah, they're not just after it, it's the first thing they do.
Yep.
Before they do anything else is that they see if they can figure out, you know, which backup product that you have. And if it's one of the popular ones, and if it's a Windows-based one, that makes everything all that much more easier. And, and then they just go and they delete your backups, and now they can do whatever they want, and there's nothing you can do to stop them.
So I'm going to be a total geek. And when you're talking about this, you know what popped into my head?
What?
Battlestar Galactica. What is the first thing the Cylons did when they attacked Earth?
What did they do?
They took out all the battleships.
That is true. That's right. Yeah.
Right?
I wasn't sure exactly what part of the story you were going. Yeah.
The very, very first episode, right? They basically were like, yep.
Except for one Battlestar?
Except for one. I think there were technically two.
Because one was Battlestar Galactica.
Yep.
And then there was a backup?
I think there's one more that was not there.
Nice.
But but that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
You go after what is sort of that last line of defense or first line of defense, if you want to think about it.
So first thing we do is blow up Helm's Deep.
Yep.
That was a Lord of the Rings reference for those of you that, out there. So what we're trying to do in this episode is to give you some advice of, what not to do, but also what to do.
But here's the thing. I think it's important to talk about, right? It's backups you want to run frequently, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we always talk about, right? You want to run backups as frequently as you can.
Yeah.
Right? At the same time, you don't want your backup disks always available or accessible because then it makes them exposed, right? For these types of issues.
Well,
so how do you balance this, Curtis? That it's sort of like you want me to, I can't think of a good analogy, but yes.
Yeah, no, it's actually not that hard, right? We're not talking about, there are those that talk about things like taking it offline. We're not talking about that. I'm simply saying that don't just have your backups, and we're going to explain how to do this. Don't just have your backups in d:/backups.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Don't, if a threat actor gains administrative control of your backup system, don't just hand your backups to them by having them sit there in a disk drive, especially one called backups. Delete me first.
So are you saying security through obscurity?
I am. Security through obscurity is certainly, I'm not saying don't call them backups. I just want
to be clear to the listeners.
Yeah. So in some sense, yes. In other sense, no. Right? So let's talk about one of the ways, right? So you might find yourself saying, well, how, if you don't have it, if you're running a Windows-based product, how do you store backups on disk without them being in a directory called backups, right? And the answer is that there are other protocols, right? And the first, I will give, again, a good shout out to Veeam, right? They have their direct access protocol so that you can install and you can basically send backups directly to the target storage that is disk, but not via NFS or SMB, right? They have it through their own proprietary protocol.
Having worked at other companies which offered something similar, right? That is actually one of the big benefits, because many customers were concerned about securing an SMB or NFS endpoint because honestly, they're not very secure, right? And they are well-known vulnerabilities, right, of those endpoints. And so it's better if you don't even make them visible to like what people are commonly looking for.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say the very first of this was OST, which was Open Storage Tech, I think is what it was. And then there was the later version of that, or later sort of derivation of that, which was Boost, which is OST with BO. That's what I used to joke that all that time. Basically, there are proprietary protocols. Sometimes proprietary is good. There are proprietary protocols to get the data from, from your
server
backup
to your
server
storage.
to your storage.
And one thing
that don't require you mounting that directory over there.
Yeah. Well, the other thing you could also think about is using iSCSI or Fiber Channel, because those are more.
Well,
also,
except that would still, you would probably format it as a drive, and it would still show up as a drive letter in Windows. Right. The idea here is a good idea, right? It's the idea, but the idea that I'm trying to do here is to not have the file, the directory showing up in user space, right? Keep backups out of user space. It's another title, but that's a really crappy title for a podcast.
Wait, I got another idea.
Yeah.
I'm full of these. VTL.
Again, nothing wrong with VTL, right?
But it does keep it out of user space.
By the way, I believe I owe Mark Stamer dinner. For those of you that know Mark Stamer, many years ago, I bet him, when VTLs were very popular, many years ago, I bet him that the VTLs would, and he's like, in 5 years, VTLs would be virtually non-existent. And I was like, I will buy you dinner if that, and interesting enough, I remember that it was Valentine's at the time. So I owe Mark Stamer a Valentine's dinner because VTLs are, by the way, what is a VTL?
It's a virtual tape library. So VTL stands for virtual tape library. So it is a disk storage system that emulates a tape library. So it accepts all the tape commands. It lets you sort of emulate having actual tapes in the system, but in the end, it stores it down to disk. Yeah, typically deduplicated storage.
Yeah, and you can even take the tapes out of the virtual tape library, right?
Which is bonkers.
And they're still there, but they're not. But they don't appear in the tape library, and that is still. Virtually all of this is security by obscurity, right? But what we're trying to do is we're not trying to leave the door wide open, right?
Yeah.
So if you have
Make
a
it a little
virtual
bit more
tape library, if you have a VTL, it's going to be connected via Fiber Channel. Technically, if someone got the right piece of software, they could manually manipulate that VTL and delete those tapes. But the chances of that are much less likely than if it's sitting there with right? So VTL, yes, is another great choice. A bigger category is just dedicated backup appliances. And the reason, and you know what, if my Windows bias or Linux bias shows here, so be it. One of the things I do believe in is things like separating things. So if you've got a predominantly Windows infrastructure, having a Linux-based storage system can augment the security, right? That if it's not authenticated in the same way, right? Especially if it's not using, again, we want to use NFS, or we do not want to use NFS or SMB. What was your mumbling there?
I'm mumbling because I know we've talked about this before. Mm-hmm. So I agree having a storage system that's maybe running Linux or something else. But I do worry about a shop that is primarily Windows focused having the expertise to secure a Linux storage system that they're trying to manage.
Yeah, that is a perfectly valid critique of that idea. Having said that, as long as it's an appliance, right? Like I'm pretty sure I have a Linux-based new washer and dryer, because I just got a new washer and dryer, and I think I said on the last recording that I got this notification that my washer has been using my location multiple times after I installed the app. It's like, why does my washer need to know where I am, right? I'm willing to bet that it's a Linux kernel inside that washer, but I don't need to maintain the Linux. Is my point. So the more they can make it like an appliance,
the better.
And and again, if you then just SMB mount it to the Windows server, then that doesn't add anything, right?
Yeah.
Again, the point is to not have it be over there. So if that's something that supports OST or Boost or VTL or something, so that again it doesn't show up in :/backups, this is what I'm going for, right?
And it's not even just :/backups, right? If you have an SMB server, it is probably sending out network information, right?
Yeah.
Through its normal broadcast technique, so other people can discover it, which means an attacker can easily discover it, even though you may not have it mounted.
Right, exactly. Very, very good point. A good argument for a separate backup network too, but yeah, very good point there. This here is also going to be security by obscurity, but it's really, really obscure. And that is, instead of using file system-based storage as your backup device, what would we use instead? Object-based storage. And why would that be any more secure than file system-based storage?
Because one, it's not directly accessible via SMB or NFS type protocols. And then the other thing is most object-based systems usually have some sort of immutability or other aspect that you could leverage in order to also provide an additional layer of security.
Yeah, I think those are two very good points, right? So it's going to not show up. Again, this is all about hiding it, right? It's not going to show up in the backup server if you're if the threat actor gets control of the backup server, number one. And number two, it probably has features like immutability built into it. And I like that, there are starting to see a company called OOTBI, OOTBI, which is out of the box immutability. They're specifically going after the Veeam market, by the way, right?
Yeah. And they were actually started by the Veeam founders.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So products like that, again, it's designed for backups. It's designed for immutability. It's designed for security. All of that sounds good. All of that sounds way better than :/backups.
But you have to also be careful, because some people might say run a file system driver on their backup server that mounts an object store and presents it out as a file server, right? And that isn't what we are talking about here.
That violates first principles. First principles in this case is don't mount it to your backup server.
Yep.
Don't have it be accessible as files on your backup server. Please do not do that. And then finally, I'm going to say cloud copy, right? This is also needs to be object storage. And by the way, both object storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud, both of them go back to the first suggestion, which is it's going to be using a proprietary protocol to copy. It's most likely going to be using the S3 protocol to copy the data directly to the storage, which allows it not to be visible on the backup server, which is the whole thing we're going for, right? So you could, in addition to on-prem object storage, you can have cloud object storage. And you want to talk about why might I like the immutability feature of, let's say, S3 more than the immutability feature of OOTBI?
So the biggest thing is with Utbe, right? If someone gets physical access, right, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Right? Someone trying to gain physical access to an AWS co-location, good luck, right? Right.
Yeah.
And also just the scale at which AWS operates, right, is very different, right?
Yeah.
From a security best practices, other things like that they make sure that that infrastructure is really secure, and also how you're using it, right? For instance, disabling public buckets by default, right? Other things like that.
Thank God they finally did that, right?
Yeah. Trying to help customers secure their data properly.
Yeah. And again, nothing against Utbe. I love the model, and I love the idea of having an on-prem copy. I'm just saying, in addition to that, consider a cloud copy. And then also with immutability. And the thing I like about the immutability there is, even if I'm the cloud administrator of that account, I can't delete that data, right?
Assuming you're using the right mode of immutability, but yes.
Assuming you're using it, there are two modes, right? One that allows you to delete it if you really, really want to.
Yeah.
And I'm saying don't use that mode.
Yeah. There's a compliance and a governance mode. I can never remember which one was which.
Yeah, I can never remember it either. But yeah, one of them, you want the mode that, and I understand the appeal of the other mode, where it's like, I don't want anybody to be able to delete it, but what happens if I really screw up and I end up putting like 50 terabytes up there, and now I got to pay for 50 terabytes forever?
You're screwed.
Or at least until the thing, right? The answer is you're going to pay for it. Yep. I get it, right? So just don't do that.
Unless you're willing to blow away your account.
Yeah. Perhaps, walk before you can run. Yeah. Perhaps you turn on the one mode first before you really get your feet wet. You really know what you're doing. And then you say, hey, let's do the full mode that Curtis wants us to do.
Now, I think, though, Curtis, it's probably important to point out, like, all of these aren't going to be like bulletproof ways to prevent your backup systems from being attacked by malicious people. All we're saying is we just want to make it a bit more difficult for them to find your backup system.
Yeah, this is the you want them to steal the other bike and not yours method, right? Have you ever watched like how easy it is for people to know what they're doing to cut virtually any bike lock?
Yeah.
Right? Or like remember the club?
Yep.
Right? Do they even still sell that?
I think they do. I was walking the other day and I saw a club on someone's car.
Yeah. And again, that if you know what you're doing, it's not that hard to get rid of the club. But it's about having them do somebody else's environment, right?
Yep.
And not just having a completely unlocked car with a sign that says "Steal me." If you and by the way, there are many other things that you should be considering that we're covering in other episodes, right? There's been a big, been a big focus for us is cybersecurity for your backup system. This is merely one of them, and we just haven't covered it so far, and so I thought it was time to do that. Can you think of anything else that we want to talk about from
There is one thing. I know we talked about tapes and then disk backups.
Mm-hmm.
For the love of God, please don't use USB drives as your backup device.
Yeah. Don't. In the consumer space, the most common backup device are these kind of things, right? The portable drives and the portable hard drives and the thumb drives and things like that. It's very insecure, very easy to steal. And also and this is why, in other episodes, this is more about personal stuff, but in other episodes we talk, I'm a huge fan of cloud backup, and I'm a huge fan of that for almost all businesses, right? Use cloud backup services versus all the stuff everything that we've talked about this episode has been about how to secure sort of traditional backup infrastructure, or you could just use a cloud backup vendor that just handles all this for you, right? And then you just need to make sure you secure the login to that, right? Use the best MFA you can. I'm a fan of cloud backup for your personal stuff as well. And what I'm really not a fan of is like as a, not using that, and then just using a, small little, very portable, very stealable, very breakable, almost all the failed hard drives I've had in my career have been those things.
Yep.
Right. Like I like Time Machine. I'm a Mac guy. Time Machine is great for transferring from one Mac to another Mac. And it's great for getting a solid backup. But the biggest thing with Time Machine is that in order for it to work, the thing's got to be right next to the thing. Right. And they do have the idea of like Time Machine box, but that's a sparse bundle. That's a whole other thing. I am not a fan of that.
I bet that we'll have different opinions on that, but that's fine.
I'm not a fan of that. I don't know why. Well, anyway, I don't know why they just don't do it via like an NFS thing. Why it's got to be a disk image over there. That's all I'm saying.
Because if they did it by NFS, they would have the same things that we've been talking about on this episode, Curtis.
You know what? Touche, my friend. Touche. Oh man. Wow. Super busted. Yeah.
On that bombshell.
On that bombshell. The title of this episode is Prasanna Proves Curtis Stupid. But yeah, those things are so small, they're so stealable, so deletable, so smashable. Yep. Please don't use those for your backups, right?
Yep.
You can use them to transfer stuff around. That's what they're good for, but that's it. All right. Well, thank you once again, sir, for making time in your very busy schedule.
I tried just for you, Curtis, anytime.
And now I got to go with my very busy schedule.
Yeah.
And go meet up with one of our favorite tape people.
Woohoo!
Pat Mayock again, and meeting with him.
Tell Pat I said hi.
I will do that. And thanks to our listeners. We'd be nothing without you. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.